Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Foundation for Free Enterprise Education Speaker Series. My name is Scott Lee, and today I'm very excited to have with us a great friend of the Foundation and a longtime company advisor for Pennsylvania Free Enterprise Week, Dr. Rody Borg. Rody is a professor of economics at the Davis College of Business at Jacksonville University in Jacksonville, Florida. And today he's going to share with us the importance of taking charge of your own education and career, how to succeed in college, and he'll give us an insider's look at what career in higher education looks like. He'll also go down the road and share with us his experience of starting his own business and tell us a little bit about what that journey has been like. So it's a great opportunity to learn about higher education and maybe a little bit about entrepreneurship. Rody holds a Bachelor of Arts in Economics and History from Huntington College and a Ph.D. in Economics from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He's taught at North Carolina State, Wake Forest, and has been a professor at Jacksonville University for 36 years. He started a consulting business as a forensic economist, and each year he's called on to testify in court about 20 times. On the personal side, he's married to his wife, Mary, who is also a professor at the University of North Florida. They have 3 grown daughters, 2 of whom have gone to PFEW. In his spare time, he enjoys woodworking and any type of fishing, but especially fly fishing for freshwater trout. Rody, welcome. It's so great to have you with us here today.
Scott, it's great to be here and good to see you. You know, we really missed being able to come up this summer, so this is a real pleasure.
Well, I'm glad you're here, and quite frankly, you're helping us, get over the disappointment of not having PFEW. It's great to see your face. So thanks for participating today. So this is going to be a great topic for our students because I think a lot of people, young people, get at least a lot of pressure put on them by their parents and all that kind of stuff, and they really don't take charge of their own education and career. So let's get right into this. When we were preparing for this video, you told me that your dad wanted you to pursue a law degree. You didn't end up going that way. So talk a little bit about your journey, the courage it took to maybe, confront your dad and take charge of your own career and your own education. Tell us about what you studied. How did you get to where you are now?
Sure. Yeah, that was a real difficult time. It's always hard. I think one of the hardest things any child has to do is to essentially tell a parent, no, that's not what I want to do. As a little bit of background, I grew up at a children's home. My dad was the executive director, and I fell in love with economics my junior year in high school when I took an econ course as opposed to psychology. And so I went off to college saying, yes, I'm going to major in economics. And I had this idea of I was going to go do there were some schools that had both doctoral/law programs. So I was going to go get a Ph.D. in economics and law, and I had an interest in labor. So I'm thinking maybe labor arbitration or something like that. And the more I got involved in the college experience, in particular, having one-on-one conversations with my professors, I realized I really loved that and I liked that environment. And so I really didn't want to do law. I really just liked the idea of being the junior law person buried in the law library so all the senior partners could go wherever they wanted to, which was what my dad's idea of being a lawyer was. So I thought long and hard about this, and I really knew that I'd changed my mind my junior year. But the difficulty is, how do you tell your parents? And not everybody is fortunate enough, but I was fortunate enough with my dad to be able to write him a letter and tell him it was his fault. Because, I wrote this letter to my dad and I said, you've devoted your life to working for a not-for-profit institution, not making a ton of money, doing something really, really good for the world. And in a certain sense, going to get a graduate degree and teach college was similar to what he had done. It was my way of trying to make a difference in some young people's lives. And hopefully most of that's been a good difference. And so that was the letter I wrote him, and I really did. I also, in that letter, I indicated to him, in which he would have understood. I said, Dad, at the end of the day, it's my life that I have to live. And I've got to do what I think is right for me, and as long as I don't hurt other people in the process, that's the decision I have to make. And he was fine with that.
Well, that's good for him. I mean, and quite honestly, going old school and writing a letter I think in many ways that has more power than just to have a conversation where maybe things can ramp up or whatever. I think a letter is a great idea to ease a parent into that situation and allow them to digest this kind of information on their own time. How did he react to that? I know you said that he was positive, but I mean, tell us about his reaction. I mean, what would you say to a person who gets a negative reaction from one of their parents?
Well, his initial reaction was, well, okay. Sorry about that. The house phone rang, and it's probably one of my daughters calling, I'm sure. It was like, one of the things you try to do in a letter like that, and what I did with my dad was, and I would advise this to people, and I think you're right, the big advantage of a letter is you get to think things through. If you just go start the conversation, basically you're ad-libbing and you're thinking on the fly, and that can be problematic. And you may say things that's not really quite accurate or as well thought out. And when you write the letter, you very carefully think about it. It's really not different from writing a research paper that you might do. You think out, what do I want to do? And my approach with my dad was to sit and think. And most of us, I think, know our parents reasonably well, was to think, what is he going to ask me? What questions is he going to have? And I try in the letter to go ahead and answer those questions. I don't say, well, I know you're going to ask me this. I didn't do that because that's a little challenging. I would just say, as I've thought about this, I really feel and think this and that and the other. And I think what you have to do when you make those kinds of shifts in life, you have to tell your parents why it is you want to do that, and also where you see that leading you. And it's interesting, the experiences I've had talking to a lot of people. It's fascinating to me. I've concluded and decided that success isn't really so much about what you studied. It's about who you are and what you do with what you studied. I happen to have a neighbor that's got a young daughter who went off and studied photography. Now, I know parents whose first reaction would be, oh no, the only thing worse would have been philosophy, Well, she and her husband are both photographers. They now live in Chicago, and they make an awful lot of money because they realized that amateur photographers want to use their studio. So they rent their studio out, and they charge for every piece of equipment. So it's not what you did, it's what you do with what you learned that ultimately really matters. And it's also about learning how to learn. In any endeavor you make, and I know from your past experiences and everything in a business environment, you certainly had to know this. You want to go out and be an entrepreneur, you've got to be ready to figure out, how do I learn about what it is I want to do? You run into people that have great ideas of things, but they don't know how to do a business plan. So then, okay, fine, I've got to learn how to do that, or I've got to be comfortable enough to go to someone and say, can you help me? And so I think that's the real key thing about all of that.
Totally agree. I love that advice, and I hope everyone heard that. And if you didn't hear that, you're going to watch this video again. So great advice. So let's morph now into the college environment. So from an educator standpoint, Rody, what's the number one reason students don't succeed when they go to college?
Well, I think the single biggest problem for students, and I will say this, as an undergraduate, I was guilty of this. I happen to be fortunate. My mother used to tell me that, in fact, pointedly at one point in time, that a lot of my advantages in school and academia was because when the good Lord had extra brains to hand out, I was standing in the right place and got hit upside the head. Because, and again, this is the thing, intelligence is DNA. Intelligence is something you're born with. And we do have different levels of it. But then the question becomes, what do you do with what you've got? And I've seen students in college who were not as intelligent as others do tremendously well. And I've seen students that were really smart fail. And it's about what you do. And one of the single biggest things is they don't think about college, the academic part of college, as a job. But it is. And the one thing that I learned in graduate school, I did not know as an undergraduate, is to think about scheduling your time. I know that when I really started doing this when I was studying for my Ph.D. qualifying exams, where I was spending 12 hours a day studying. And I built a calendar where I built in, here's my break time, here's my lunch time. And I also, every week, I built in my relaxation time. So that on Wednesday, when I got that sort of, boy, I'm really getting tired of studying feeling, I could look forward and go, but Friday night, I'm going to go do this. Okay, I think that's really key. And having things in a calendar, and in these days, boy, you and I both know, we've been around long enough, it is so much easier. You know, you put it into your phone, you do it electronically, you set reminders. Students fall behind, they don't keep up with things, they don't get things done on time, and when that happens, they get panicked, they rush, and if nothing else, they turn in work that is subpar. You know, so I think, and having that time scheduled out and understanding that when you put down on your calendar, one of the courses I teach is purely online. And I tell the students all the time, I said, you need to set on your calendar, just like you would for class, Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 2 o'clock, I'm setting aside an hour, hour and a half where I'm doing economics. And they have to think of that as class time. So getting your life organized that way in college, and college is a great time to do that, because the consequence of screwing something up is you get a bad grade. In life, screwing something up can mean at the end of the week, you get a pink slip and you're fired.
Yeah.
You know, and I've known of specific examples of that. A young man here in Jacksonville, a friend of mine knew the situation really well. That was his job in this project was to leave the office at 11, you know, so that he could leave the office in plenty of time to be able to deliver a bid to the city by noon. Well, he left at 11:10. There was a major accident on the highway. He showed up at 12:03, and they did not accept the bid. He got fired.
Yeah.
So, you know, doing things on time matters in the real world.
Indeed, it does. Great advice. So let's talk a little bit about, for those of us that are considering maybe a career in higher education, what does a day or a week in the life of a college professor look like? Meaning, you know, all we see as students are, you know, the classroom lectures and, you know, just the face time that we get. Maybe we go to some consulting hours or some TA hours or something like that. But what does your job really entail, you know, day and night?
Well, on a daily basis, if you care about your craft and you care about what you do, teaching a college class is kind of like performing in a play or singing with the choir or singing in a chorus. You plan and you rehearse. You know, now I will admit, at this day and age, I mean, I've been at JU now for 36 years. You know, I've been rehearsing for 36 years. So a lot of it, you get to where you know it better, but it's the same thing with singing or acting. But what you have to do is you have to spend time ahead of time thinking about what is it I need to talk about? How is this going to work? I've had friends of mine say, well, gee, I wish I had a 12-hour-a-week job. And I say, well, that's like saying that a lawyer's job is only time in court, and it's not. So, you know, you've got to prepare your lectures. You've got to think about the examples you want to use. How do you want to use them? How are they going to fit in? And then you also have to pay attention to your audience. So for me, you know, I've got typically at JU, I would have a 4-course load. I'd have 12 hours of instruction every week. And from that 12 hours a week, you've got on top of that, you know, they always tell the students to expect 3 hours out of class for every hour in class. And if it's a new course for me, I'm probably gonna spend 3 to 4 hours getting ready for a class, prepping things. We're doing that right now, my wife and I both, for fall. Even though the classes we've taught, particularly for my wife, right now, they're classes that we've done before, so you've got an awful lot in place, but the calendar changes, and you know, it's interesting. It takes a fair amount of time just to sit down and figure out, well, okay, when is all this going to happen? Right now, everything's got to go online. So I've got at least one course, my master's course, nothing was online. It's all got to go online. It's all got to be available for the students and everything. So typically, you're going to spend that time. So a lot of that means if you got a Monday morning class, that means you're spending time, if nothing else, that Friday to Saturday, getting ready for that. And now the advantage is two things that I think are really key about this. One is there's a real degree of flexibility about this because, you get some input on what your schedule is going to look like. And that's one of the real upsides to an academic life, in particular, if you've got two academicians. Early on in our career, my wife and I would schedule our classes. We'd work real hard to schedule our classes so that one of us was Monday, Wednesday, Friday. The other one would be Tuesday, Thursday. The advantage of that being, hey, somebody can always stay home if they need to and look after a child if they're sick or something. But the other thing that's interesting, I think, about the college teaching experience is it's very entrepreneurial in nature. And it's also very much like being in the arts, because when you go into the classroom, you're on. I once said something to a colleague about doing that and kind of trying to, engage them. And he said, I don't feel my job is to entertain them. And I looked at him and I said, you're right, but if they're so unentertained that they're asleep, it's hard to teach them anything. So you got that element to it. But from the entrepreneurial side, while there's a certain body of information I have to cover, I get to decide how I want to cover that. I get to decide what examples I want to talk about. I get to decide, do I want to use something that's going on in the real world right now? I teach a Principles of Macroeconomics course. I can assure you, all of the economic efforts that we've done with regards to the pandemic are going to come into my class this fall. We're going to talk about the stimulus packages that have been passed. We're going to talk about how important it was to provide individuals with extra money, not from a bleeding heart perspective of these poor people who've lost their jobs, which I care about, but from an economic standpoint, it's the fact that the key element right now I was reading the other day is this person has assessed that for every dollar that you provide in unemployment benefits to people, or these $600 extras we've been doing, that's going to translate into $2 in the immediate economy. Because they go spend that in somebody's store, that becomes income that they use to pay somebody else for the goods and services they use. So if you suddenly don't have that, that's huge. And so this is going to be a great immediate example for that stuff. And that's what makes it a really great. The final thing is about teaching college for me. I said earlier that one of the reasons I decided to become a teacher was the relationships that I had with my professors. Now, to keep that really clear, my little college was tiny. We had a total of 400 students in the entire school.
Wow.
So you knew all your professors and they knew more about you than you wanted them to know. But I made an observation one day in my career at JU. I had a student in the office and we started off with economics, but then we're just kind of talking about, hey, how are things going? What's happening with life, et cetera. And it dawned on me, I told a colleague who came by and he said, you seem to have a lot of students in your office. And I said, yeah. I said, I really like that. I said, the day I ever have a dean tell me that I spend too much time just talking to students in my office, I said, that's the day I'll leave. And by contrast, that actually happened to my wife in her employment. She's at a regional state university. And one year in her evaluation early on, they said, well, that's really admirable that you do that, but we think that amount of time may be taking away from your research agenda. And neither of us was teaching college just to do research. That wasn't what we wanted to do. So that's my life.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you for that. It's kind of a deep dive into, higher education and what a day in the life of a professor looks like. And I think you dispelled a lot of myths. I think people assume that, it's just easy. You only have to work 12 hours a week. You're actually triple, quadruple that in preparation for those 12 hours. So thanks for that. I appreciate that. So you touched a little bit about, the entrepreneurial aspect of being a professor. I don't think we really understand that, but you also created a side hustle a little bit. And in the remaining time that we have left, which isn't much, I want you to talk about, your consulting business and how you started it, and how it's grown over the years and things like that. So, briefly describe why you did it, how you did it, and where it's at now.
Okay, I had a mentor from graduate school who did forensic economics work, and that means doing analysis and work for legal cases, evaluating economic damages. Things are way off in the future. We have to know how much money today to give people. And it was kind of interesting. I had in the back of my head that I think I might like to do that one day, and wasn't quite sure how to do it. And as I think a lot of things like this start, it was an accidental conversation. I got a phone call one day at the office, and it was an attorney who had a close connection to JU. I suspect he's actually a judge now. I suspect he just called the institution and said, "Hey, I want to talk to an economist." And we had lunch. And at the end of lunch, he said, "You seem like a reasonable guy. You can talk your way out of things. Let's give this a shot." And that was back in 1989, and it's just evolved since then. And it's like a lot of activities that everyone has to understand. There's an awful lot of what you do, and I'd say probably 80 to 85% of what I do in this field is fairly boilerplate. It's fairly straightforward. It's exactly the same thing I did last week, no big deal. But you then run into things that are very interesting, and they're not the same as always. And for me, a lot of times what's interesting is those create situations of things that I can bring into the classroom. And so my business has grown. It's grown by word of mouth. And my key thing is I try to deliver a good product, and that means make sure that it's accurate. You have to realize you're going to make a mistake, but if you do, you fix it. The other thing I try to do is I try to make sure that what I charge for that is certainly reasonable and fair. Excuse me. I'm fortunate every now and then, because I do both plaintiff and defense work. Every now and then I get to see another major economist in Florida's stuff. And when I do that, I can go in and look, and I can say, "Oh, I see what he's charging per hour." I always set my fee schedule less than his. But I will tell you this, somebody asked me one time how much I make doing that, and I said, "I won't tell you that. But I will tell you that I never thought anybody on the planet would pay me what they pay me to do what I do." And so that's the other thing about it. When you look at things, if you get all caught up in, I want to make a lot of money, you lose sight of why you're doing it. There are circumstances I have to be careful not to get overly engaged. But sometimes I'm dealing with young people that have been injured, and they've got to be carried out and helped for the rest of their life. And you feel like you've done something good. At the end of the day, yes, I'm well paid, but you feel good about that. And over time, it's just been word of mouth. And and I think that's true for an awful lot of businesses out there, particularly small businesses. Let's think about this. If you or I need work done around our house, nowadays we've got Angie's List and stuff, but still, one of the first things I'll do is talk to somebody I know that's been through that. And say, "Hey, you had your roof done recently. Who'd you use? What do you think? How'd that go?" And so I think that's an awful lot of that. But I've been real fortunate, because all the consulting work I do counts, because I have to do professional development work for my institution, and it counts for that. So part of what you also have to do, though, is, and this is where that calendar comes back in, you have to know when things are due. And you have to be very clear with all of that. I had a situation years ago where they called me on a Tuesday looking for my report. And I said, "Well, you told me you needed it tomorrow." And they said, "Well, yeah, we'd hope to have it today. We've got mediation tomorrow." And what I told them was, I said, "Well, then tomorrow was not when you needed my report. You needed my report earlier." So now I've learned, I phrase that differently. So make sure you're very, very clear about all of the expectations that your clients have, and that you meet those expectations. I'm not sure you really need to exceed them. We hear that a lot, exceed people's expectations. I had a program down here once where a local business guy came and talked to a group of students, and he raised that issue. He said, "Frankly, if you exceed expectations, you're wasting money." He said, "You negotiated with your client to provide X for Y price. He said, that's exactly what you do. If you provide X plus, you're costing yourself profit. And that can be a bad thing. And this is a company here in Jacksonville. They're one of the single largest dark ride manufacturers in the world. And they work real hard. They have an incredible system to try to make sure everything's done within what they bid for it. Because if you don't, you're working for free.
Wow. That's a very interesting take on how we see things and how maybe we should think about seeing things a little bit differently. So that's probably one of the gold things that's going to come out of this interview. So Rody, as we wrap up, this has been a great trip, but I want to ask you one last question. What is the best piece of advice you can give to our viewers who may be considering pursuing a career in either, secondary education, elementary education, higher education? What's the best piece of advice you could give them?
Well, I think the single most important thing, and I think this applies whether it's education or any other field out there, you really need to make sure that you like what you do. I've known people that loved economics. I know a professor that went to UNC Chapel Hill to teach, Harvard Ph.D., brilliant man. He was there 1 year, and then he spent the next summer in therapy because he couldn't get in front of a classroom.
Wow.
And 2 weeks before the fall, he walked in and told him he had to break his contract. You have to understand what are all the facets of what you do, and you have to really decide what do you love about it that makes you do it, and then the stuff you don't like, you have to decide, is that stuff I can put up with? Nothing's perfect, but you have to decide, because if not, no matter how much money you make, no matter what else is going on in your life, you're going to be miserable. And if you're miserable that much time of your life at your work, then that's going to translate and impact every other aspect of your life, and it's just not worth it.
That is the absolute perfect way to end this segment. I can't thank you enough, Rody, for joining us today. Thanks for the deep dive into not only higher education, but a little bit into entrepreneurship and just being aware and listening to people that are maybe asking you to take a risk or to take a chance on doing something, and being willing to do that. And obviously standing up to maybe mom and dad, not necessarily fighting with them, but really making a cogent and coherent case for taking charge of your own life and your own education. Absolutely fantastic session. Ladies and gentlemen, Rody's information is going to appear at the end of this video. Excuse me, if you'd like to reach out to him. His contact information will appear. But again, Rody, thank you so much for spending time with us today. It's great to see you. Really appreciate everything you do for us.
Happy to have done it. Thank you very much. And I look forward to the 2021 summer.
Amen. Thanks so much, Rody.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.